In this video, I'll take a look at this Meyer Optic Görlitz Lydith 30mm f3.5 wide-angle lens. Hi guys, my name is Matti Sulanto. I'm a photographer and a Lumix ambassador from Helsinki, Finland. And in this video I have a very interesting lens. This is the Lydith 30mm f3.5 wide-angle lens, and I've used it on my Lumix S1 and S1R full-frame cameras. I contacted the manufacturer OPC in Germany and I asked them if I could borrow a lens for a review, and to my surprise they sent me this lens. But this is not mine to keep. I'm gonna return this after I'm done with this review. I wanted to try this lens, or that's why I sent them the message, because when I saw this on their website I got really interested. This is a classic vintage design, but it's a new lens, and I like some of the classic vintage lens designs, and that's why I wanted to see how this would perform on my Lumix cameras. Meyer Optic Görlitz is an old German lens manufacturer and lens brand. They started as early as 1896, so that's a long time ago. They closed down their business in 1991, but the brand got revived again in 2014, and after some colorful events it's now owned by OPC in Bad Kreuznach in Germany. They specialize in old vintage lens designs. This is their widest, this Lydith 30mm is their widest lens, and they have several lenses in their lineup, and the longest is a 100mm telephoto lens. And all those lenses are manual focus classic vintage designs. And their lenses are available for several different mounts, almost all the mounts that you can name, both DSLR and mirrorless. And of course the angle of view depends on the sensor you have in your camera. On a full-frame camera this is a wide-angle lens, 30mm wide-angle. On an APS-C camera it's a 45mm equivalent like a standard lens, and on a Micro Four Thirds camera this would be a 60mm short telephoto lens. All those make some sort of sense, but I think this 30mm option is the most interesting to me. But like I said, all those equivalent focal lengths make some sense, and I think this might work pretty well also on an APS-C camera or on a Micro Four Thirds camera. But I tried this only on the full-frame Lumix S1 and S1R cameras, which are L-mount cameras, of course. And the lens design is the same for both DSLR and mirrorless cameras. And when you look at the mirrorless design, especially the rear end of the lens, you'll see that the rear element is very far recessed in the lens, and that's because this mirrorless version is almost like a DSLR lens with a built-in adapter. Because on a DSLR there's the mirror between the lens and the sensor, but on a mirrorless camera you need some extension on the lens to be able to, focus to infinity. But before I go any further and talk about the sharpness and mechanical construction of this lens, let me show you a few pictures that I shot on this very interesting wide-angle lens. Alright, I hope you enjoyed the pictures, and also please remember to subscribe to my channel and tap the bell there if you haven't done that already. And also, if you like this video, please buy me a cup of coffee, there's a link down below. And now let's talk about the mechanical construction or the mechanical quality of this lens. which is, in one word, really good. The lens is very simple design. There are only two moving parts, the focus ring and the aperture ring, and both feel nice and smooth. And of course the focus ring has hard stops at both ends because it's a fully mechanical design. The only complaint I have is that the aperture ring has no clicks. And of course for video it's a good like a feature, but for photography it's not that good because I can't see the aperture number in the viewfinder. And every time I want to check the aperture or adjust the aperture, I have to look at the lens to be able to see which aperture I have. But if the aperture ring had clicks, then I could count the clicks and I could know where I am on the aperture scale without looking at the aperture ring itself. It's not like a big deal, but it's still a minor inconvenience or annoyance in real life photography. But other than that, the mechanical quality of the lens feels really solid. And then about the optical performance, which is kind of interesting. The manufacturer or the designer OPC says this is a traditional design that gives you that vintage lens look, and it certainly does that, but it may not be for everyone. The sharpness is good in the mid part of the picture, even wide open, and it gets really good when stopped down just a little bit to about F5.6. But the corners and the outer parts of the frame, they are pretty soft. They are actually really soft at the wide open, but they never get really sharp no matter how far you stop down. And that is something to be aware of if you are considering this lens. If you hope for corner-to-corner sharpness, then this is not the lens for you. And of course, if you mount this on a smaller format sensor like APS-C or Micro Four Thirds, then you're gonna lose those unsharp outer parts of the picture, and you probably can get a decent sharpness across the frame from corner to corner if that's what you're after. And there is of course some vignetting visible, but to me it's not a downside, it's more like an upside. To me, I like vignetting, and when you stop down, the vignetting goes away. There's also quite a lot of chromatic aberrations visible, especially at around the corners or outer parts of the picture, and that can be distracting to someone's eyes. And some backlight pictures can also look very interesting, especially if you shoot at the wider end of the aperture scale. You get this really interesting rainbow color looking flare or reflection in your pictures, and that can look really nice and beautiful. But of course, if you do it all the time, it wears out also quite quickly. And here are some more pictures that I've shot on this lens, and then after that I'll have my conclusion and my final thoughts on this lens. I hope you enjoyed the second set of sample pictures, and before I go to my conclusion, I'd like to talk a bit about the manual focusing on this lens. I recently made a separate video on how to use manual focus of vintage lenses on your Lumix camera. I'll put a link to that video at the end of this video so you can take a look if you're interested. But there's no need to walk away from a manual focus lens or lenses, especially if you use a mirrorless camera, because manual focusing is really easy on a mirrorless camera. And now my final thoughts on this Lydith 30mm f3.5 lens. This is a fun lens to use and it certainly gives you that vintage look. However, I think this is a special purpose lens because of the sharpness characteristics. I've said it many times on this channel that the sharpness is overrated and it's not the most important thing in photography. And I still think the same way, of course. But a lens like this that is not sharp from corner to corner, I think it cannot be considered as your only general purpose lens, because sometimes you might want to have at least a decent sharpness from corner to corner. I don't think that's too much or something unusual. But if you use this lens at wider apertures, the 3.5 f4, you can certainly get some really interesting and beautiful pictures. But I expected this lens to get sharp from corner to corner, at least when stopped down to about 11 or so, f11. So if you buy one of these, you get a true vintage look in your pictures, and the price for this lens is around 878 or so euros on the manufacturer's own online store. And for that kind of money, you can certainly buy at least 1 or 2, maybe even 3 real vintage lens and get similar kind of look. But of course, this is a new lens, and for many people, I think that alone can be very important. So all in all, this is a very interesting, fun lens, and it certainly gives you that vintage look. And if you are crazy about that vintage look, this lens might be worth considering if you are looking for a vintage type of design. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again in the next one.